We continue this special edition on the priorities of the Spanish presidency of the European Union. One of those will also be to strengthen ties with Latin America. This part will focus on the attempts by Madrid to open dialogue with Cuba. We'll discuss that with Spanish MEP Luis Yáñez in Brussels. But first, this report.
Last October, the Spanish Foreign Minister Miguel Ángel Moratinos went to Havana, his goal to normalise relations with Cuba. But Madrid's top diplomat also wanted to convince the EU to come back to a common position on Cuba established in 1996. That demanded the liberation of political prisoners and the respect of human rights before normal relations could be reached. Moratinos said Spain wishes to elevate relations between Cuba and the EU, with Spain taking on the responsibility for the 27 member states. According to Cuba's dissidents, the arrival of Raúl Castro in power has not resulted in more freedom. The Cuban Commission on Human Rights says on the 6th of January there were 201 political prisoners. That figure was 208 last summer. Moreover, 869 dissidents were held in custody for a short time in 2009. Among those dissidents was blogger Yoani Sánchez, known internationally for her scathing reviews on the hardships suffered by Cubans. She spoke exclusively to Euronews via the internet.
I've noticed in the last few months a rise in repression and an increase in the punishment of those who think differently. We've seen this during several events and rallies in the street, a crackdown on the opposition, dissidents, independent bloggers, demonstrations that differ or have a criteria contrary to the state. The big challenge for Spain in the next few months as it holds the EU presidency is not precisely to put an end to the common position of the 27 member states in relation to the Cuban government, but it's more to look for a common position of solidarity with the people and the citizens, and to make a clear distinction that Cuba is not its government, that Cuba is neither a party nor an ideology, but it's the ordinary people that form this society, and they need your solidarity, and that the outside world needs to demand freedom of expression and the rights which all Cubans need.
A unified EU policy towards Cuba is a long way off, but remains an issue Madrid will try to push forward.
Luis Yáñez, Spanish Socialist member of the European Parliament in its Euro-Latin American Parliamentary Assembly. Earlier this month, you travelled to Cuba with your wife on a tourist visa, but you couldn't get in. Could you tell us what happened? What explanation did Havana give you?
None. There was no explanation given then or afterwards when I got to Havana's José Martí airport and showed them my entirely valid passport and equally valid tourist visa. I was going to have a few days rest with my wife, but in the end I couldn't enter the country. The authorities told me literally that I'd have to take the first plane back home.
Can what happened to you be interpreted as a refusal by Cuba to talk, that it's not ready to sit down at the table for dialogue?
I don't interpret this expulsion as a personal affair, but rather as a decision taken at the highest level of Cuban politics. They know perfectly well who I am. I believe it's a gesture to tell the Spanish EU presidency and the European Union directly what lines not to cross. Cuba today is in the process of closing in on itself. It's almost a resistance to the death, a kind of entrenchment by the country's regime. The national economy is going very badly, the human rights situation is still unchanged, very bad. Therefore, they are very afraid of foreign influence, of contact from abroad.
Como siempre, mal, y todo eso le hace tener mucho miedo a la influencia extranjera o al contacto con el extranjero.
Why does Spain consider it so important to open up dialogue with Cuba?
Because Spain considers that 15 years have passed since the EU adopted its common position on Cuba in 1996, and that now is the time to think about it again, to review this common position and make an effort to establish new terms with Cuba, a dialogue about the EU's relations with it. I believe Spain is really interested in Latin America and Cuba, and I believe Spain deserves a gesture of trust for having taken this initiative. It's an enormous task, but we must make the effort.
Why is the EU willing to talk to countries like North Korea or Iran and yet is so reluctant to do the same with Cuba?
The reticence is the same. The dialogue with North Korea and Iran is very, very difficult. Everybody knows that. In addition, with those two countries, there is the subject of nuclear energy and the possible building of atomic weapons. And so the questions are very different. In Cuba's case, Europe has never refused to talk. There were lots of trips, such as those by former Development Commissioner Louis Michel. He went there several times last year and 2 years ago. So the dialogue was never interrupted, but a lot more still has to be done, and Cuba must also be asked to make an effort.
Thanks for taking our questions, Mr. Yáñez.